From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The White House comes out in support of a bill giving it the power to ban TikTok and other foreign technologies as the Senate votes overwhelmingly to overturn a rewrite of the District of Columbia Criminal Code. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues on the editorial board, TikTok influencers Kate Batchelder-Odell and Colin Levy. TikTok is this Chinese social media app very popular with teens and youth and has come under some controversy not only now but in the Trump administration as well when it reportedly divested some of its U.S. assets. But it seems that Congress and the authorities in Washington don't really trust that that is an arm's length transaction. Let's start with FBI Director Christopher Wray. This is him speaking at a Senate hearing this week about his concerns on letting TikTok operate in the United States.
It's the control of the data to conduct all sorts of big data operations. It's the control of the recommendation algorithm, which allows them to conduct influence operations. It's the control of the software, which allows them to then have access to millions of devices. So you put all those three things together and, again, come back to the starting point, which is this is a tool that is ultimately within the control of the Chinese government, and to me, it screams out with national security concerns.
Let's also have a clip here as Senator John Thune, South Dakota Republican, on Fox News on Thursday, making the argument why Congress needs to act.
We have evidence that TikTok or the mother company to TikTok, ByteDance, actually was accessing the non-public information of American users of that platform. And we all know that China is an adversary, is doing everything they can to spy on Americans. So I think this is just something that we need to do to be vigilant, to create a process where we can review, examine, and determine whether or not we need to block some of those apps, whether we need to mitigate those risks, how we go about that. But it's high time for Congress to be heard from.
Kate, what do you make of this? Certainly, it seems to me that banning a social media app in the United States at the president's decree would be an extraordinary step.
Yeah, Kyle, I don't think there's really any dispute about the problems that the FBI director laid out this week. We know that the Chinese government can appropriate whatever TikTok is vacuuming up from the United States. And we know that they don't have what we would consider, private sector companies. It really is all can be funneled back to the government. So I think that is a valid threat. And I would put that in a separate bucket as the concerns about the effect it has on teenagers and the negative influence it has on American youth. Now, since we know it's a problem, I do think it would be a really dramatic step to ban it entirely. I think the bills to ban it on government phones are no-brainers, and I think that probably should have been done a while ago. I think some of the state actions in that regard have also been positive. And I think there is a conversation to be had about what next steps to take. But I do think some of the bills we're seeing, for instance, the one this week from Mark Warner, we're talking about Congress kind of setting up this new process for allowing the executive branch to have more authority over these questions. And I think we should proceed there with caution. And there may be more narrow ways to get at some of these core problems that we're describing with TikTok.
I think those are good points. And maybe this is leverage that the White House would be given and would never actually be used, because it could force ByteDance and TikTok into some reforms that people like the FBI director would have faith in. I do think that even giving the president this power would be pretty extraordinary. On the other hand, think back to the Cold War. Would Ronald Reagan have allowed the Soviets to control some sort of media platform that was extremely popular among young Americans, let the Kremlin program and own what is happening on MTV? I find that a little bit doubtful. And I also think it's worth pointing out that non-consumer things, there's already government control over what Chinese technology can go into American systems. President Trump banned some Huawei telecom equipment from U.S. networks. And Colin, I understand completely on security grounds why the Trump administration felt the need to do that. And I'm not sure why or how much it would be different simply because TikTok is not a behind-the-scenes product, simply because it's a consumer-facing product.
Yeah, Kyle, I agree entirely. I think, along the lines of what Kate was saying, I think we do know that, of course, even though ByteDance is a private company, of course, all of that information is getting funneled back to the Chinese government. And, that is going to expose a whole stream of information that the Chinese government can get their hands on. But I think what's important here is we really need to drill down and talk about exactly what we're so concerned about the Chinese government getting their hands on. I mean, what we're actually talking about is the Chinese government aggregating massive amounts of personal data, right, and storing it on mainland servers. So, okay, what's the personal data that we're talking about? Is it fingerprints? Is it voice recognition? Is it individual location tracking or search history or stuff hackers could use to create some sort of fraudulent identities? I think we need to get into that. I'm not saying that those things aren't bad things. The bad things that could be done with the data that's collected are a problem, but the relevant question is how it pertains to the regulation and how that's a national security threat. So again, to go back to what Kate was saying, of course we should be banning it on government devices. Of course we should be banning it really from any sort of government building or anyone who is working with the government. And as a matter of personal conscience, by the way, I think we should be talking about the responsibility of individual Americans here. A journalist should know very well that they shouldn't have TikTok on their phone, especially if they're doing any interviews or any business on important government issues. So I think there's a lot more room here to talk about measures that we can take and individual things that people can do when they have more knowledge of the fact that all this information is going to the Chinese government.
But I think it's incumbent on the Biden administration, the FBI, the authorities in Washington to answer some of the questions that are swirling around TikTok. And I think that's true if they are going to move forward with this bill and give the White House essentially the power to ban TikTok, or even if they don't, or even if it doesn't pass and they want to make that case to the public that this is not something you should have on your phones. I mean, I think there are all sorts of questions. One of them that Kate brought up is what exactly it is serving to teens, if it differs in some way, what it gives to American teens versus to Chinese teens, to the extent that you're concerned that social media companies can create self-esteem problems, body image problems in high schoolers that are using them. How much is TikTok trying to prevent that? Or is it trying to encourage those kinds of problems in America's youth? Then we go to the more direct security questions. I mean, I've seen a lot of reporting and questions raised about what the app can do in terms of getting at a user's other data, maybe without the user even knowing it. I mean, the FBI surely has security experts that can answer that question. Congress can get the app reviewers, the security experts from Apple and Android, the people who make the cell phones, to provide the public some answers to those questions. And then the third question I would raise is the issue of whether data on U.S. users is in fact staying in the United States, or whether it is piercing the barrier and being taken overseas to China. I mean, the clip we played earlier, Senator John Thune said that there is evidence that that is happening. And Kate, I guess what I would ask the senator is give us the evidence. What is that evidence? The frustrating thing about this debate to me is it's playing out amid all sorts of allegations about what TikTok is doing or might be doing. And I would like some real answers on how substantive those concerns are.
Yeah, Kyle, I mean, to my earlier point about how we're kind of swirling things in different buckets, I think like we're discussing on social media and its influence on teens, I think it's highly negative and is a malign cultural force in that regard. But I think we have to separate that from some of the other issues we're talking about. And one reason why I think there might be some virtue here in kind of starting with some discrete improvements is as well the influence and the data vacuuming up that we're talking about is very important. There are also some other core concerns. I mean, Brendan Carr from the Federal Communications Commission has raised the point in hearings that TikTok is popular in the U.S. military. It's banned on military-issued phones, but it's harder to manage on personal phones. That includes an enormous amount of location data, sensitive access to military installations. How is the Chinese government using that data? Could we make a real effort to get it off our U.S. military bases as a start? I would think that would be a productive conversation to have. So I think these are some of the ways that maybe we could start introducing bans and reaching further as we try to get some of that evidence you're describing on to what extent is it influencing, is the algorithm influencing Americans in negative ways? and some of these other questions that are more murky.
The final point I would make on this is just the political one, which is I still see this as an attempt to give the Biden administration some leverage that it would need, because this is an app that is used by, I've seen the figure, 100 million Americans. And Colin, does the Biden administration really want to set down an order that is banning that? I can't imagine that would be popular among young voters. On the other hand, maybe some of their parents would be thrilled.
I think we also have to be really careful here. How do we directly address the national security threat without compromising core American freedoms and becoming more like China? We're just going to ban an app, ban it for everyone, even though its particular danger may only be applied to certain segments of the population, as we were discussing before, people who actually have national security issues on their phone. And as Kate was saying, the idea that TikTok is widely used in the military, I can understand why that could be a real problem. But again, I think some of this has to come in the form of disclosure and more explicit warnings to users. I was reading a column the other day that was joking that, when Apple users agree to let TikTok collect their data, they're not explicitly allowing their data to be collected by the Chinese government. But maybe they should be asked that. I mean, maybe that's exactly what they should be asked, and see if that has a more salutary effect on the downloading process.